Hey everybody, John Bernakovich here with All Points Design. Today we're talking about values-based decision making, and I'm joined by Tristan Holm from Katoomba Eco Village in South Africa. Tristan, what's your question today?
Yeah, thanks, Javin. My question today is, who's not a good fit for values-based decision making?
Yeah, it's a good question. So values-based decision making is really about taking in the whole of the project you're working on, be it your life or your business or your eco village or your project. A lot of clients I work with take on values-based decision making to work on large scale homesteads and acreages and farms. And what I found is that individuals who think they know it all, they've got a closed mindset instead of an open mindset. And they come into values-based decision making trying to dissuade themselves from the validity of the work before they even begin. So they're not willing to give it a shot. They're not willing to give it a try. They're not willing to look at it or to work with it or to experiment with it. And as we know, the only way to understand if something has value is to do it. It's not to think about it. It's not to read a book about it, but to go, oh, I've read this book about food and cooking, and in it, it talks about balancing fats, acids, and salts. And until you actually blend those together, you don't really know what that is. So some folks who come to the work are just hell-bent on this not working for them, and shock of shockers, it doesn't. I think the other thing is it takes time. It takes time to develop your context. It takes time to ask yourself questions. I worked with a sheep farmer and breeder who was Canadian, but he worked in New Zealand, and he came back and he reached out because he'd heard me on a podcast and he wanted to go through values-based decision making. And I remember, he was at that point, he was in his earlier mid 60s. And I remember him saying, this is the hardest work I've done since I was a teenager, since when we're younger and we're asking ourselves those existential questions and what's going on. And he was just, this is difficult. And not only is it time within the week, within the module base, the first couple of weeks, you're at that sort of 10-hour mark, especially if you're doing the assignments and the work. It's not just listening and watching the videos, but you're asking yourself deep questions. Who am I? What do I want for the future? What's important to me? And if you're in a group, you're doubling that. And of course, it's never doubled. It's like 2.5 more work, because as soon as you include somebody else and you start interacting with them and talking with them, it's so much more work. So I would say folks that don't have the time to put towards it. Other folks who've really struggled with it are folks that have pre-existing mental health issues, folks who have issues with self-confidence or issues with depression or issues with self-worth. Those questions come up right away when you start asking, what do I want? And if you don't have access to a sense of what the future might look like for you in any way, shape, or form, all of this work is derived from you, is derived from who you are and what's important to you. And if you're not currently in a state of mind where you can ask those questions and hear those answers, it can be very difficult to do this work. And I've seen a lot of folks who get into what is a wealthy, remarkable life look like for me, and just stall. They're like, I can't even imagine that. And so I can't give that to anybody. Nobody else can give that to you. It's a question about what's next. And sometimes it means we don't do a 20-year or a 10-year mark. We do like a 6-month mark or a 3-month mark. We actually shrink the distance between where you are and where that future is. And sometimes that can help, because some people, they just can't think of the 5 years. So we always start with what works, right? Start with where you are and start with what you have. And so if you can think of next week, we start next week. And so you have a context that starts week to week, and then we move to month, and then we move to season, then we move to bi-year or full year. We move in those incremental ways, and it helps to build more capacity for folks. Other folks I've seen who've struggled with this are folks who think that the process they take on, I think we've all met folks like this, kind of in the new age movement, kind of in the progressive movement, kind of in the woker than thou movement, where they want their process, be it values-based decision-making or anything else, to become everybody else's process as well. And they become more evangelistic about it than actually doing the work themselves. And so they start talking about it and they start being like, oh, this is great. This is great. And when you ask them, do you do it? They go, well, yeah, And you can just tell because of their demeanor, it's not the case. And a while back, I was teaching values-based decision making to a group of farmers, and they were very well known with the holistic management circles. And so I thought, well, I'm going to reach out to a bunch of holistic managed educators who's not only in this group but associated with it, and speak to them about my work and all the rest of it, get input on it. And so I interviewed a number of holistic management trainers. I said, great. So what do you do with your context? Like, where's your context? How does it play into your life? And they're like, no, I did it. It's in the back of the journal. I don't think I've looked at it in 4 years. I was flabbergasted. Here are individuals who are actively doing this work and the context isn't alive in them. And so when I look at that, it's very hard to teach from a place of reality. Like, oh, this is the reality of what I use on a daily basis. And in my situation, I'll pick up my context for a full decision, maybe a handful of times a year, but I still do the spot checks. I regenerate my context 2-3 times a year. I keep the main daily statement of purpose and destiny statement of purpose in my mind. It helps to direct me throughout my day, throughout my life. So all of that's alive. That's a living process. It's a living life design process. Whereas I think some people want to set it and forget it, and they want to think they did the course and they don't want to pick up the tool and actually use it daily. The masterpiece of your life cannot be made from a tool that stays in the toolbox. And for some folks, they go through the process, they do the work, and then they walk away from it and they go, okay, well, I did that thing. Why isn't it working? Why isn't my lawn not cut? Well, because your lawnmower is in the shed and you haven't used it and you haven't tooled it and you haven't kept it maintained and you haven't sharpened, all of these maintenance pieces. So I would say from my experience, that's what I've seen. From your experience, having, dipped your toes into this water and also kind of experienced it yourself, what have you seen as elements of people who may not be suited either currently? Sometimes people, need to have a shift or a change, or potentially, some essence pieces, some pieces that maybe it's just not a good fit for people.
Good question. I think a big piece for me is about, do I really believe that I can take full responsibility for my life? And am I the main actor in my life? Do I feel that life is happening to me and I'm the victim of the bad things that happen? Or am I in a state where even when, bad things happen, I can see that they are opportunities for a refinement of the way that I go about my life, and that it's actually a form of feedback that can, if used correctly, take me to a different level, as it were, whether it's, in all spheres of life, I suppose. I wouldn't say that, I don't think it's a precursor for someone to have a full sense of full responsibility for themselves to begin a context journey, because I think that going through this work, my experience has been that it has built my capacity to recognize my power, I suppose, to be able to claim more and more of that responsibility. Because ultimately we've all taken on a lot of social programming, and this process is about shedding some of that and becoming more attuned to what's really true for us uniquely. And it's from that place that I feel like people can build capacity over time again and again. So yeah, I feel like that's one of the key pieces to it.
I love that. It's fascinating. And I love that we're having this conversation, because I lose some of those pieces that have become ingrained in me, that I am the main actor, director, producer of my life. And it was just yesterday that a colleague and a friend of mine was saying, oh, I'm following this new person, and they see you're the main character in your life. And it was revelationary for them. It was just this moment of like pure, the light comes down from the heavens and, gives them the spotlight. And it's just this moment of opening. And I remember smiling, going, I'm so pleased that you've come to that conclusion. And it is one of those pieces that helps us to move, is that life is 100% negotiable, and we're the negotiator. We're the one that is going to go around and say, well, I'm looking for this, or I'm working with this. And your recent decision is a great example where, okay, this decision comes to me, I'm evaluating if it's a good idea. It doesn't seem so I'm going to change I'm going to change all the nuances around it, because that's what I need to do to be more centered, to live my life, to work with it. So that's a great one. If you don't believe, or if you're not willing to adopt the stance that you are the main character, actor, director, producer, sound designer of your life, and that life is happening to you, not for you, or not willing to start to adopt that, I think that's a great piece about folks who may not work well with this process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it also speaks to what brought me towards this kind of work as well, which is the experience I had in setting up an urban permaculture business with a mentor of mine. And the first thing he said was, well, we'll need to create a context. And I thought, oh yeah, I sort of remember that thing that was a small module of the permaculture design course. Okay. And he had a lot more experience with it than me, and he created quite a bit of the context, and it all sounded really great. But to be honest, mostly I just wanted to start. I wanted to transform my career from the previous entity towards being a paid permaculturalist, and I didn't really care how or why or what I might give up in the process. I just wanted to do it. And our first potential client came along, and they just had a total stall. They didn't want to fill in the first form, information form, which would have given us a little bit of an understanding of who they were and what kind of piece of land they were looking to design, and what was important to them. And that I just still wanted to get going, and if it was up to me, I probably would have just gone around and met them and worked however the client wanted to work ultimately, and given up on any processes that we sort of put in place or agreed on. And the conversation came up amongst those of us who were starting the business about how we should proceed. And the mentor said, well, it's pretty simple, guys. We've got this in our context, and we've said, we have a process for everything, and we follow it, and we work with clients who are ready. And it was, it sort of hit me in the face, and it was just an obvious no. And it made me realize that we could have forged on, and maybe we would have made some money. But what would we have given up in return? I think probably some of our personal sanity, possibly some of our relationships with each other, a lot of time over trying to meet demands that weren't aligned with our values of what we'd said we wanted to create in our experience of our jobs together. And from that point, it just felt like, well, this is actually the piece that is relevant to all of life, whether it's my life or my partnership or my community or whoever it might be, a business. And that's kind of why I'm here, I suppose.
That's awesome. I think that approach of working with what wants to be worked with, that was something that was given to me early on in my permaculture career, that go where you're invited and go where the invitation is welcome. And so I think that's part of it. If folks look at values-based decision making and they are feeling invited into the work, I think that's a really important piece. And similarly, if somebody reads through the what values-based decision making is about, and they just go, if you're starting to feel like it's not a good fit, it probably isn't for you right now. It's not the right fit. It's not the right approach. It's not the right conversation. And just working with what wants to be worked. That's been something that's been very much on my mind as of late, this idea of eligibility. And you talked about it a little bit before, where you were talking about, walking around and seeing all these different food systems and going, right, in sometimes the over enthusiastic individual. It's like, well, we can do anything and we can make anything and we can create anything out of nothing. And yet reality comes in and goes, well, here's what farmers, growers, productionists have been dealing with for 20, 30, 40 years. And sure, there may have been some issues with that. There may have been some conversations about that. But at the same time, if it's happened 100 times over, there's probably something about that. So it's important to be responsive to what's around us and to be responsive to ourselves. So yeah, thanks Tristan so much for asking me this question, and thanks so much for spending the time talking today. If folks are interested in values-based decision making, check out the link below. There's almost always an opportunity to take the work live or to do it DIY. And remember, it's always a good time to redesign your life. We'll see you in the next one.